Hello, welcome to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis, and today we're back to the summer of the Bee Gees. Our story so far, for those of you who are just now tuning in, when I'm looking for music that I want to add to my library, one of the things I like to do is go back to older artists with whom I'm familiar. I know their greatest hits, but whose catalog I'm not all that familiar with. And I like to dive into that catalog to see, okay, is there stuff in here that I missed the first time around that I want to add to my library? And this time around, I'm doing this with the Bee Gees. I've always been a fan of their top 40 singles, and there in the late 70s when I was in high school, I mean, the Bee Gees owned the top 40, particularly when you factor in things that they were involved with, even though they weren't Bee Gees. They weren't technically the Bee Gees. And here I'm thinking, Yvonne Elliman, Samantha Sang, Andy Gibb, Barbara Streisand's Guilty album. I mean, they were all over. they were all over the radio there in the late 70s. And so I always liked the Bee Gees, but do I really like them or do I just like their hits? Well, that's what I've been working on over the last few weeks. And I started off with a video about a month ago or so in which I gave you my top 10 singles that hit the top 40 by the Bee Gees. Then a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I guess, I did my first update. And in that update, I gave you some just rough reactions to about the first third of their catalog, from Bee Gees First in 1967 to Life in a Tin Can from 1973. He said, working from memory and hoping he got that year right. I'm pretty sure I did. Today, my original plan was just to focus on the really jam-packed years between 1974 and 1979, 74 being the release of Mr. Natural, 79 being the release of Spirits Having Flown. But I'm going to go ahead and do 74 to present day. I'm going to go ahead and lump it all in, get one update done. I have managed to make it all the way through the discography. I'm in the process of going back on my second in-depth listen now that I have the lay of the land and I've done a rough evaluation of each album. I'm listening to them again to make sure that they're lining up the way I think they're going to line up. So that means we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but at the same time, the points I'm making are pretty broad, so I'm hoping I can get this done quickly. We shall see. I want to start the Bee Gees' career, I think, fairly consistently is divided into three chunks. Their original chunk, where they are 60s British pop masters, specializing as we get into the early 70s, specializing in ballads. Then we've got, a couple of years in the wilderness, and then they come back as a disco titan hit machine from 75 up through about 79 or so, 79, 80. And then we've got the years in the wilderness, after there is a huge amount of backlash against the Bee Gees, because they owned top 40 for a few years there, and that level of ownership tends to inspire. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Yes. And so we've got the ballad year, the intro and ballad years, the disco years, and then what I'm calling the sputtering years, and that's 1981 on. And we're going to talk about these last two periods today. I'm going to make a concerted effort, though, from this point on, not to refer to the word disco. I'm doing this intentionally. Firstly, because this is not in any way intended as a comment about the quality of mid to late 70s dance music. I don't think it is a negative thing to label something as disco. That's, but that sells what the Bee Gees were actually recording. If you listen to their albums, yes, a lot of it is dance music. A lot of it is just straight up soulful R&B. They've got occasional country songs in there as well, mixed in with this, supposed disco music. So it is it is an overly simplified, knee-jerk pigeonhole that I don't think really matches the output of the band. But I also don't like using disco because I'm going to try to say this nicely. I lived during the Disco Sucks backlash time period. I remember this well. I remember there for a while, disco was just a label that was put on everything as a marketing thing. Ooh, you want a new blender? Try our new disco blender. Ooh, I mean, it was just things that had nothing to do with music were being labeled as disco because disco was a hot new thing and it had become very popular and And so a lot of the backlash was against that, just that oversaturation, the fact that anything could have that 5-letter word slapped on it in the most callous and transparent marketing strategy ever. I mean, it was just, it was frustrating. So to a certain extent, the backlash was understandable. But, and you knew there was a but coming, it certainly didn't help that disco in its fundamental form was a music that was made primarily by black artists, that was the audience for which was primarily black and gay. And so there was a certain amount of racism and homophobia that went into this backlash. I'm not going to say that everybody who reacted against disco, that everybody who ever said disco sucks, or anybody who ever bought a little disco sucks pin that they would, a button that they would put on their shirt. I'm not saying that they were being overtly racist and homophobic when they did it, but there were racist and homophobic elements to that movement. The most visible element of this disco sucks backlash was the great disco demolition in, what did they call it? Disco Demolition Night. I have it pulled up over here on my side screen. In Chicago, local DJ who was building a name for himself by broadcasting against disco, had signed on with the Cubs, I think. Chicago Cubs no, it was the White Sox. Excuse me, it was the White Sox. I apologize. To have this disco demolition night where if you brought in a disco record, they'd add it to the stack, and in that evening after the game, they were going to blow it up. Or between games on a double header, I don't remember which it was, and I don't want to give this enough. I don't want to focus any more attention on what actually happened, because it was a bullshit event created by bullshit people that was attended by bullshit people, and it was just bullshit from start to finish. But this guy who started this DJ who started this, and it turned into this big riot, and they ended up, essentially ripping the park down. The guy who started this, okay, yeah, you could make an argument that he's a rock and roll DJ, and he didn't like disco because disco didn't have any real soul. It was just a beat, and it was people in sparkly clothes, just like that episode of WKRP where Johnny Fever wasn't going to play the disco music on that TV show anymore. But yeah, the DJ who started all that, why was he so adamantly opposed to disco? Well, because he had been fired by one of the local stations when that station shifted its format from rock to disco. Come on, folks. The entire movement was fostered by and driven by people who were envious, people who were motivated by getting theirs back, as opposed to any artistic statement. And racism and homophobia was the accelerant on the fire. So the whole disco sucks thing, when I think about it now, just makes me want to put my head through a wall. And I read comments on YouTube videos and this sort of stuff, and I know that it's very much in vogue to say, well, yeah, there were racist elements to it, but come on, there was more to it than that. And well, no, not a whole lot more, because again, I was alive during these times, and I distinctly remember the affiliation between disco music and homosexuality. So, no, we're not going to go there. So if you're on the Disco Sucks bandwagon, if you don't like it because, it's not good rock and roll music, okay, fine. We'll find a rope that you can go piss up. I honestly don't care. If you are steadfastly opposed to disco just because you're one of those contrary people who has to be opposed to anything that's popular, we'll find another rope for you. Yeah, I'm pretty sensitive about that. So, in the disco years, in the dance music years, let's say it that way, we've got albums that range from good to great. The good albums are Children of the World, Spirits Having Flown. Both of these are pretty good albums. But the great ones, Mr. Natural and, oh my God, Main Course. Fantastic stuff. We've got a lot of good music on those albums. A lot of good dance tunes that, you will get your toe a-tapping and get you... why are you sitting there? You should be dancing. Oh, boy. But there's also just a lot of good music on all of these albums. Just a wonderful, fertile period of creativity here for these guys. We've also got the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever, which is, it's one side of one of the albums, in essence, is the Bee Gees, and the rest of it is everybody else. But still, that one side is really good stuff. We even have... a couple of weeks ago, because I have this movie. I actually have this movie on DVD in addition to having the soundtrack. A couple of weeks ago, I sat down and watched that movie again. I saw Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band when it came out in the theaters the first time around. I grew up in rural eastern Oklahoma. We had the county seat had a twin cinema, so and they changed movies. So every week, if you were really rolling in dough, you could see two movies, one on Friday night, one on Saturday night. Usually we had to make a choice because you couldn't afford to do it both nights. But because it was a rural cinema, because it was a rural theater, we got mostly B movies or movies that were A-list but really getting to the end of their run, their runtime. No movie that was ever worth holding over. Okay. And Sgt. Pepper was playing there one night. So yeah, that's the one I went to. And I thought at the time, well, this is cheesy, but it's fun. And I hadn't seen it again. Right? This is when it first came out, late 70s, 78, I guess, 79, 78 probably. I don't want to look it up. And then, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, I popped that DVD in and I watched it again for the first time. Only the second time I've seen it, the first time since it was originally released. And I'm watching this. My wife is puttering around the house and she comes by. It had just started and she comes in. She looks over my shoulder. She looks at the screen and she's, what? Before long, she pulls up a seat and we're just watching this thing and we're just cackling and giggling all the way through it because it is just a goofy, stupid, fun movie. The acting ranges from just inept to insanely over the top. It's, oh man. And all the way through it. Every time we've got the Bee Gees on the screen, we're both paying our almost exclusive, undivided attention to Morris, because Morris is, out of the three of them, Morris is the one that has the really strong sense of humor. I think if he had wanted to, he could have had a career performing in movies if he wanted it. But beside the point. There was, like I said, these years, the dance years, the mid to late 70s, this was a fertile period. They did a lot of really good work in this period. And then, boom, that pendulum swung the other way, and we had the backlash, and it suddenly became, horribly uncool to like the Bee Gees. Ooh. And they released a series of albums here, largely of which I was ignorant as they were being released. I mean, the only one of these, the only one of these that I remember when it actually came, I remember the press. I remember that they were appearing on talk shows to promote, was Still Waters. That was, out of all of these albums, from Living Eyes in 81 to This Is Where I Came in 2001, the only one of these that I was aware of at the time was Still Waters. And I'm calling these the sputtering years because, from my perspective, yeah, they're out of view. Their career is sputtering. But I don't want that to be interpreted as these are crap albums, because they're actually not. They're very well done. They're very well performed. They're very well produced. The music is good on most of these albums, and as I said last time I did an update, every Bee Gees album will have at least one song that I really, really like. I mean, let me double check real quick. I'm just looking at my check marks on my spreadsheet here. Yeah, I've got that one has one. That one has one. There's one album that doesn't have any songs that I like. There's only one. Every other album has at least one song on it that I like. It's just that the bulk of this music is not aimed at me. It's electronic dance music, and I'm not a big fan of electronic dance music. I've got nothing against it, but it's not something that I seek out. It's not something that I'm wanting to add to my library. I am comfortable making a sampler of the sputtering years. The one or two songs off of most of these albums, put them all into a playlist, plunk, there, I've got it. I don't feel compelled to go back and actually get copies of these CDs. I've been listening to this, or copies of the vinyl even. I've been listening to these albums through Amazon Music. That's mostly what I listen to if I'm streaming, because virtually everything in my house, virtually everything in my life is somehow attached to Amazon. And I've been going back and getting albums on CD when I really like the albums. Right? And this, I'm not done. I'm amassing a library here. I don't see me getting albums from the sputtering years. Maybe This Is Where I Came in. That's the one that I'm most likely to get. That's the one that gets the highest grade out of these albums. But again, it's not that I don't like them. It's not that I think the music is bad. It's that most of the music does not appeal to me. It's well done. It's just not my cup of tea. Yeah. So that means I have finished my initial run through the discography. I've listened to all of these albums at least once. Some of them I've listened to multiple times. I've gone through and I've made my initial decisions. Okay, this is the one I like, this one I like, this one I like, this one I'm not too sure about, this one, and I've roughly sorted them. My next steps are, I'm going to listen to the whole thing again, just to make sure, now that I've gotten through the whole thing, just to make sure that the head-to-head comparisons are accurate the way I'm thinking of them. And then I'm going to be ready to do my wrap up of my Bee Gees of the summer. And as it stands right now, I've got 2 videos planned. I'm going to do another top 10 track video. I did top 10, my top 10 singles that cracked the top 40. This time I'm going to do my top 10 album tracks. I'm going to cheat on a couple of them, but I'm going to do my top 10 album tracks. Because like I said, every album has at least one. But I'm also then either going to do a full album ranking or at least a top 10 album video. More on that as it comes. And that's pretty much it for today. Summer of the Bee Gees is proceeding swimmingly. I hope you enjoyed this update. If you did, go ahead and click that like button. I would appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already. It's free. Why not? If you do subscribe, click the bell notification for icons because, you know, why not? The YouTube folks seem to think that's important, so okay. I appreciate that. Thanks again for watching, and I hope that the rest of your day is untroubled. See you soon.